Friends, the Date, and the First Night. Chapter 1 The Arrival. February 2nd, 2017. It was February 2nd, 2017, and Shen's flight had just landed in Sydney. The flight was a grueling 22-hour journey. Shen was tired, and the jet lag was taking immediate effect. It was 3 in the afternoon, but she felt like it was 3 in the morning. She got off the plane and went through the airport to the front of the building. She walked outside, and the warm Australian summer heat hit her face. She sighed with relief. Back in Germany, it was freezing cold, and this trip was a nice getaway from the cold. Shen waited a while. Brad was to be picking her up from the airport, and would also be the first time they would meet in person. She was excited beyond belief, but also a bit nervous as well. Brad showed up in his car a few minutes later. He got out of his car, and Shen finally got to meet Brad in person. They both knew what each other looked like, and foot traffic was quite small, so it didn't take any time to find each other.
There's my girl. Or should I say, milady?
Of course, that's the first thing you say when we should be that. They hugged each other, and Shen couldn't get the giddy smile of excitement off her face.
So how are you? Did you enjoy your flight?
Brad clearly noticed how tired she was. Tired as hell, and fuck you. Brad could only chuckle to himself.
Car's this way. Let me take those. You go sit in the front. I'll put these in the back.
Brad put her stuff in the back seats and got into the driver's seat. Now, Shen and Brad had talked about the sleeping arrangements for quite some time before the trip. They talked about hotels and sleeping at friends' houses, but they both settled with staying at Brad's house. His parents were not home and were away for a week. This left the entire house to themselves. Brad would sleep in his room, and Shen would sleep in the guest bedroom. Brad drove them to his house. Nothing was said during the journey home. Brad knew Shen was tired and didn't feel like getting her pissed at him. He pulled into the driveway and parked the car. Brad looked over and just noticed Shen was fast asleep. He laughed softly to himself and took her stuff inside and put it in the guest room. He then debated to himself, should he wake her up and make her walk inside, or should he pick her up and carry her to the bed? Brad pondered to himself under the shade of a tree. He thought for a minute, then decided. He opened the guest room door, the car house, and the house door and the car door, undid Shen's seatbelt, and picked her up out of her seat. He proceeded to carry her all the way to the bedroom, making absolutely sure not to bump her into anything. The only problem was the guest room was on the second floor of the house. He mustered all of his power and was able to get her up to the stairs to the bedroom without dropping her. He laid her down in the bed, popped her shoes off, and put the covers on her. Brad turned the lights off, closed all the doors, turned the car off, and chilled downstairs for the next 7 hours, then went upstairs to go to bed himself. He couldn't help himself and checked on Shen to make sure she was okay. He slowly walked up the stairs, cracked the door open very slowly, and looked inside. She was still fast asleep. He closed the door slowly and went to his room, fell asleep. Chapter 2 Meeting Friends and the Date. February 3rd, 2017. It was 8 a.m. on Friday the 3rd. The sun had just barely been up over the city of Sydney for about an hour. Brad was already up planning the day out. Just 3 months ago, Shen had asked him out in front of thousands of people online, and today was the big day, the date. He was nervous, but extremely happy and just hoped everything had planned would go smoothly. After planning, he moved to the kitchen and started to make some coffee. At the same time, he started to make some breakfast, eggs and sausage. He didn't do much cooking and was already making a mess. He was able to get a hang of it soon and was turning out great. He was looking around for a spatula when he saw Shen in the corner of his eye.
Hey there, sleepyhead. You feeling alright?
What happened? And how did I get in that bed?
Fell asleep on the ride from the airport. I didn't want to wake you up, so I carried you to the bed.
Shen was actually confused and surprised. What? How? Whatever, I'm too tired to care at this point.
So are you hungry?
Yeah, actually I am. It was the smell of the food that actually woke me up. Brad proceeded to make food for the two of them. They didn't sit at the dining table and instead ate in the living room on the coffee table. They chilled out on the couch for about an hour. By this time, it was about 10 a.m. They both got dressed for the day and got in the car. They were gonna go meet Shen's friends that lived in Australia. You all know who they are. They met up in a coffee shop in downtown Sydney, and it was like meeting someone you haven't seen for years. They all hugged and greeted each other. The warm February air seemed to just add to the already perfect day. They all sat at a big table and talked the hours away. Eventually, Brad got up and asked Geronimo if he could talk to him for a second. Shen didn't know what was going on, but both Geronimo and Brad knew. They walked out of the shop, and Brad gave him the rundown of the day, the preparation, and the date. They needed to get Shen ready for tonight, but didn't want her to know about the date. See, Shen knew they would be going on a date, but she didn't know when. Brad said it would be after RTX, so Shen had no idea it would be today. He wanted to surprise her. They made up a lie about how they were all going to some kind of formal event and everyone was getting dressed up nicely tonight. They came back and they sat down, chatted and enjoyed every moment together. They got up and walked out of the shop. They just began walking around the streets, Shen enjoying the sights of Sydney. Even at the peak hour, the temperature only got up to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And even better, there was a cool breeze blowing from the ocean. Around 4 p.m., they all gave their last goodbyes and parted ways. Shen and Brad drove home and they began preparing for tonight. Brad dropped Shen off but didn't get out.
I gotta go grab something from the store. I'll be back soon.
Okay, I'll just start getting ready in the meantime. With that, Brad drove off and Shen went inside to start getting ready. Brad was going to the store to buy a flower for Shen. He bought the best rose he could find. He got back home and made sure Shen didn't notice the flower.
I'm home.
He said, walking inside. He got no response. He then screamed it.
I'm home!
I heard you! He laughed and went to his room. Suit, pants, tie, hung up all ready to go. He put on his suit, brushed and groomed himself. He was all ready for the night. Brad was anxious and at the thoughts of how everything would play out. He walked downstairs and waited until Shen was ready, rose in hand. 20 minutes later, he heard the upstairs door open. He turned towards the stairs, and Shen was walking down. Brad was mesmerized. She was wearing a stunning red dress, her hair in magnificent curls, and makeup only added to her beauty. Brad was well taken back by her. He had never seen her dressed up before, nevertheless, seen her other than a few pictures in the one day they spent together. Brad's mouth was slightly open. Shen was clearly blushing, but enjoying the moment. She noticed Brad was clearly daydreaming, and she waved her hand in front of him. Earth to Brad, is anyone home? He coughed.
Yeah, sorry.
Are you alright, Brad?
Yeah, you just look absolutely beautiful.
Shen was blushing even harder now, and now Brad along with her. Brad didn't think and accidentally played the flower card too early, nearly ruining the surprise. Luckily, Shen just saw it as a nice gesture.
This is for you, milady.
Handing her the rose. She was a bit taken away by the gesture, as this wasn't really a special occasion, but loved it anyway, considering the two were technically together. Oh my god, it's beautiful, Brad. I love it. She hugged him.
It's a bit late. I think we ought to get going. Don't want to be late.
With that, they walked outside. The cool summer air mixed with a gorgeous full moon light, and couldn't be any more perfect of a night. They got in the car and began the journey into the city. A few minutes in, Shen noticed they drove past the road they needed to take to the event. Brad, you drove past the way we were supposed to go.
Oh, I know.
Brad smiled, and Shen was seriously confused. She didn't question it and just sat back and rolled her eyes a bit. A minute later, he pulled up to a nice restaurant and parked on the side of the road.
Here we are.
And where is here? We're not even where we're supposed to be.
Are we not?
No. Brad looked at her with a grin. Shen thought about it for a second. No, she thought. She looked down at the rose he had given her and closed her eyes. Brad, you're a fucking cuck. Brad laughed.
It still hurt.
You're fucking with me, right?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Shen sat quiet for a second. There is no event, is there?
Nope.
Shen got really nervous and tense. She knew exactly what was going on now. He tricked her into getting nice and dressed up to take her on a surprise date. In a high-pitched voice mixed with crying. No! That was bad.
That was good.
Brad said nothing and just began hugging Shen. She thought she was going to pass out, but luckily Brad's hug kept her from fading off. They sat there for a few minutes hugging. Brad wanted to make sure she was alright. Why would you do this to me?
I don't know. It's fun, I guess.
They stopped hugging. Shen wiped the tears from her face and eyes. She still couldn't believe this moment was actually happening.
Do you want to wait a few minutes before we go inside?
No, I'm fine. Shen took a deep breath. She straightened herself up and opened the car door. Brad followed close behind.
May I take your hand, m'lady?
She gave him a smile and offered her hand. They walked across the street to the restaurant. It wasn't overly fancy, but by no means a cheap place. They walked into the restaurant and went up to the counter.
Hello, do you two have reservations?
We
We do indeed. One for Bradley and Veronique. Alright, there's a table available if you would just follow me.
You had reservations? How long ago did...
Did you reserve this?
Probably a month.
Shen tilted her head back and softly muffled, "Oh my god." They got to their table. The table was in a secluded part of the restaurant, usually reserved for anniversaries, dates, or formal occasions. The table was decorated with beautiful silverware, plates, a small vase with a gorgeous flower, and scented lit candle. The rest of the night saw nothing out of the usual. They talked and ate fine food. Shen began to talk about how the relationship would work after RTX, but Brad didn't want to hear about that. He just told her he wanted to enjoy these moments with her, even if they would be the only moments physically together for months. He told her that they would talk about it after RTX and before she left. The rest of the time was perfect, and by the time they were done, it was about 8 p.m. They got up, paid for the service, and left the restaurant. About that time, it was clearly cloudy and thunder could be heard in the distance. Just as Brad began to say,
Man, I hope it doesn't rain while we're walking.
it began to downpour. God damn it, Brad, why do you have to fucking say something? Brad immediately took his suit jacket off and placed it over Shen as fast as he could. They ran across the road over to the car. Brad kept the jacket over Shen as she got into the car. He shut the door when she was in, ran over to the driver's side, and got in.
Well, that's a great way to end the night.
Brad was absolutely soaked to the core. Shen didn't fare too much better, despite Brad trying his best to keep her dry. Hey,
Hmm?
thank you. I had the greatest time of my life, despite getting soaked in the rain.
I tried my best. I'll do anything for you. I'll always be there for you. And if I can't do it, I'll at least try my best.
Nothing was said after that. They just sat there, staring into each other's eyes. Shen's heart was beating 1,000 times a minute. She knew what was happening, and she was blushing hard. Brad, too, was blushing extremely hard. Brad took one last second to stare into her eyes, then leaned in for the kiss. Shen followed, and their lips locked together. Their first kiss. It wasn't a long kiss, but not short, just enough to be savored, but not overdone. They stopped. They backed off, and they were both smiling and blushing hard. Brand began a little coughing fit, and Shen could only give off a nervous. Brad shook it off and got his keys. His hands were clearly shaking, and took him a few seconds to get the key in the ignition. Shen noticed this and smiled to herself. He was so nervous. Nothing was said on the ride home. Shen just sat in her seat. She still couldn't get the smile off her face. Brad was trying to concentrate on driving. He, too, was still smiling. They finally made it home around 9 p.m., and the rain had mostly subsided. Brad parked the car in the driveway and turned the car off. They both sat there, not looking at each other. A few moments passed, and Shen made the move and kissed Brad on the cheek. "Good night." She then opened the door without saying anything more
And ran inside.
giggling to herself the whole way. Brad just sat there, unsure if this night just happened. He sighed with relief and placed his hand on the steering wheel.
Best night ever.
Little did Brad know it was only the beginning. Chapter 3: The First Night, February 3rd to 4th, 2017. Brad sat in the car for about 10 minutes, just thinking to himself. When he was finished, he got out of the car and walked inside. The house was quiet and dark. He made his way up to his room, pausing for a moment, and looked at the door down the hallway. He was debating whether or not to check on her again, but he knew she was all right. If anything, she was doing more than all right, he thought to himself. So he went into his room, kicked off his shoes, and took his suit off. He then grabbed some pajamas from his bureau and put them on. He went over to his bed and flopped over onto it. He couldn't sleep. He lay there for a few hours, unable to stop staring at the ceiling, thoughts racing through his head. At the second hour, Brad couldn't take it anymore. He walked out of his room and began walking down the hallway to the bathroom to go splash water on his face. Maybe it would ease his nerves. Shen, on the other hand, was asleep, but not having a good sleep. She was having a nightmare, and just so happened Brad was walking past and heard the commotion. Shen woke up, sat in her bed, sweating, heart racing and breathing heavily. Brad flew the door open.
Shen, are you alright?
She didn't say anything. Brad ran to her side and sat down next to her on the bed. He hugged her and held her tight. They sat there for a good few moments. Jen's breathing slowed back to normal, and her heart was beating normally as well. She finally got the courage to speak up. Thanks, Brad. Again.
Of course. I told you I'd always be there for you.
The hugging intensified.
Like it's been for the past 30 minutes and nothing else happened.
That's not yet. They both laid down on the bed. Brad.
They
Not
both lay
leaving
down
her
on the
side,
bread.
keeping her comfortable and safe. He pulled the covers over both of them. At this point, it was more of a snuggle and less of a hugging for comfort. Brad started to nod off a few minutes later, but Shen adjusting her position woke him back up. Brad just kept staring at the ceiling, honestly waiting for Shen to fall back asleep. After about 20 minutes, he looked next to him to check if she was asleep. She wasn't. She was looking at him, deep into his eyes. Shen wasn't thinking too much, but she knew what was about to happen and how she felt. So she made the first move and slowly moved in to kiss him. Brad knew where this was going as well, but he was more conservative. He didn't really want it to go anywhere tonight. He didn't want to take advantage of her feelings and state of mind, but he went with it. They began to kiss. It wasn't a very long kiss, but held much emotion and feelings. They stopped and looked at each other. They, they looked at each other to see if they were both okay with what was clearly about to happen. Nothing more was said as they kissed again. This time, it was more passionate, longer, and fulfilling. It was clear there was no turning back now. Brad caressed Shen with delicate precision. He slid the hand up and down her legs, down the thighs as far as he could reach, without breaking the kiss. Brad broke the kiss and started to kiss her neck, giving her a slight nibble on the neck. Shen was lost in thoughts, but she couldn't think straight anymore. Hormones and instinct kicked in and took over. And they hugged. That's it.
And they hugged.
Time lapse.
Fascinating.
They both snuggled up next to each other, feeling satisfied and joyful. Maybe our love is real. Maybe our relationship could work long distance. Brad thought about it. He was happy. He didn't care about distance, as long as he could talk to her. Shen rested her head on his shoulder, lay there, reflecting on what just happened. Now what? Brad looked at Shen, then back at the ceiling, then back at Shen.
Sleep.
Shen chuckled, and they both snuggled up closer. I love you.
I love you too.
And with that, they both fell asleep. Who knows what the rest of the trip will hold, or after. The